Hi, James.
Sometimes we're feeling like the world is against us.
I highly doubt that we could change. It must be ingrained in our DNA. But we can try to see with different eyes. Cause we harbor deep inside. I highly doubt that we can change. It must be ingrained in our DNA. But we can try to see with different eyes. Cause we harbor deep inside.
Who cares
Well,
if people can hear or not?
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome, friendly fans. I'm Friendly Ben. I got a host today, Charles. We're talking to Tom Scioli, Eisner-nominated cartoonist, G.I. Joe versus Transformers, his newest book, I Am Stan, which I do not have the notes on. Tom, what is it called again?
It's called I Am Stan, a graphic biography of the legendary Stan Lee.
Wonderful, wonderful. And I just finished Jack Kirby, The Epic Life of the King of Comics. We also have the punk rock doctor, a dear friend of mine, Dr. Daryl Wilson, trustee of the Edwards Foundation, emergency doctor, vocalist for the band, the Bollweevils. They've got a record coming out called The Essential on Red Scare Records. That's going to be available May 5th. Doc, how are you?
Good, Ben. How are you? Good to see you too, Charles. It's been a while.
Daryl, I got a question for you.
Sure.
Angry Samoans, Adolescents, and the Germs.
Yeah.
Those are your top three.
Those are my top
Why?
three. Those bands are the bands that got me into punk rock. I was, listening to metal back in the day, loved AC/DC, Iron Maiden, things like that. And as a young kid, got into skateboarding, wasn't a very good skateboarder at all. And I remember getting a mixtape from one of these guys I was skating with, so you gotta listen to this tape. And so on that tape were those three bands, the Angry Samoans, the Germs, and the Adolescents. And I would say that the Angry Samoans probably were like the band that really hit me. I mean, the Germs, Darby Crash's voice and his guttural growling, and snarling, and just the songs are just, they hit you. The Adolescents were kind of just this almost uplifting, almost poppy sounding thing, but they were still kind of snotty and get you. But the Angry Samoans were like just everything. They epitomized how you kind of felt as a teen, with Lights Out, great song, Battle of Jerry Curlin. I mean, it's like you can just talk about, they saved Hitler's cock. I mean, it's like these songs are just amazing songs, right? I mean, there's nothing about punk rock at that point that is in any way going to be digestible by every person, because I'd be playing that tape, or I'd have those songs and blast them on the radio, and people were offended, right? It's like that's the offensive as all get out. But it kind of was like raw and angry, and it made you feel like, if you felt disaffected, you're like, yeah, this is how I feel right now. I feel like telling the world to F off, and this kind of was doing that for you. And so to this day, I mean, Back from Samoa is like one of my favorite records ever. I still play it. I know it's not something that is, once again, acceptable in some senses to say, wow, but that was the music at the time, I mean, hell, they had minstrel shows back in the day. That wasn't acceptable either, but I mean, we had that, and that's part of entertainment. So we have to understand that's what we came from, and we move on to other things, and we can look back and go, as we have more information, I realize that was kind of effed up, and I have more information now, so I'm much better now. This is how we evolve. We're human beings. We evolve as creatures. We don't stay static. So I think that those bands mean a lot to me, because they really got me into punk rock. And to this day, I like I said, I hear those songs and it gets me really hype. It makes me feel it, this emotional charge of like, that's my beginning.
I see, Tom. Other than Kirby, who are like your top three influences?
Yeah, I mean, Frank Miller is a big one. Frank Miller, like even kind of before Kirby, like I kind of like was into his stuff, and then the Kirby like got more into Kirby, and they kind of reinforced each other. Alan Moore's a big one.
Try and get the reader involved.
Kirby, Alan Moore, Frank Miller, Simonson. Mike Mignola made like a big impression when he came on the scene. Just all of those guys who have this sort of graphic, kind of like worldview, and of course Ditko. Like Ditko, the surface. It took me a while to kind of really like love the surface of Ditko, but everything like under the surface of Ditko is like I'm such a fan, and from an early age, like all the Spider-Man, all the stuff that matters. Ditko had, he like the under, like maybe the surface wasn't as polished, or but all that other stuff under there is so much more important.
Yeah, it's really creepy artwork too. Like I would say, like he's more like the indie guy, if anything, other than those guys. But yeah, I love his stuff. It's really unique.
Yeah, I feel like where I'm at now is like closer to Ditko than any of those other guys, where I'm just really into like the nuts and bolts of making something work and making something have like an emotional impact on the reader, and not getting too caught up in sort of like flowery, crossing every T and dotting every I.
I gotta chime in on this Ditko thing. You went to the building where Steve Ditko works and actually spoke to Ditko. Was he familiar with your work, or was that like, what was that like?
I mean, he basically told me to get lost in the Ditko. I kind of showed up and I wasn't sure what to expect. It's just this mythology had built up, and I had talked to some other people who had done that, sort of knocked at Ditko's door and talked to him. And I don't, maybe he'd gotten like a few too many of those kind of visits, but I just sort of knocked on the door, and he like saw, sort of like sized me up real quick. He just lifted his finger and then stepped out of the door, shut the door, started walking down the hallway, and I thought, oh, I guess he's like leading me somewhere. I guess I'm supposed to like follow it, like he's going to take me to the Sanctum Sanctorum. I was like, oh wow. And then I realized, oh no, he's getting away from me. And he just he turns, he goes out the door, and just starts going up the stairs, and I kind of look up and I'm like, Mr. Ditko, and then he's gone like in slow motion one step. But and I thought like, yeah, how did I envisioned it going differently, but it's like, yeah, it's I'm showing up out of the blue to meet this guy, and thinking about it, I mean, I met Stan Lee, and I got the Stan Lee experience. He was very Stan Lee. I met Ditko, I got the Ditko experience. I mean, that's didn't say a word. Just like whenever you see Ditko in a comic or something, he's always got his face covered, or he's not saying, he's maybe holding up a sign that says something, he's not talking. So I got the Ditko experience.
That's cool. Another thing I wanted to ask, this is a question that Charles and I have been debating. And Tom, I want your opinion, and then we'll go with the Doc's opinion. Now, you did Fantastic Four Grand Design, so you're very familiar with the Fantastic Four universe. By the way, great book. If I think the Treasury edition is still out. If you get the chance to pick it up, guys, it's really worth your time. Does Galactus have a stomach? Now, Charles says no. I say yes. Does Galactus have a stomach? I
would assume some sort of, thing that corresponds to a stomach. I think of Galactus being sort of made out of, sort of cosmic matter, made out of the same thing that the gods are made out of. Instead of blood, I guess ichor. So it's kind of like a sublime version of the internal organs that would, not have like one-to-one correlation to human organs or animal organs, but would be almost like the Platonic ideal of these organs. So I'd say yes with an asterisk.
Doc, what is your opinion? Does Galactus have a stomach? You know anatomy.
Tom is, I agree with what Tom is getting at, the concept, because Galactus is a construct of the cosmos, right? And he has a job to do. His job is to destroy, and it's by consuming matter in that sense, right? Now, there's lots of things that can consume matter, but they don't necessarily digest things using an enteral tract like a mouth, a stomach, an esophagus, and then have excrement that they produce, because you've never seen Galactus take a dump. I've never seen that happen. I don't think Galactus has a stomach. I think that Galactus consumes matter in a way that is almost through absorption of some sense. So there's no real need for a stomach. It's through his cellular activity, whatever these cells are. So no, he does not have a stomach.
Maybe that energy sort of channeled through those that tuning fork on his head.
Right.
And if you think of like the Silver Surfer, there's a scene in like the first appearance story of Galactus, the coming of Galactus, where the Silver Surfer is sort of offered food and he doesn't put it in his mouth either. He kind of like goes like this and like just turns it into energy and draws it in.
Right. Would that be the curse of having the power cosmic, that you can't have the pleasure of consuming food?
I have never seen the Silver Surfer smile, so I think that kind of answers your question, Doc.
But I mean, your last name is Rad too. You've got to have something cool. It's like, come on. He's Surfer and he's Rad, and he's not having a good time? No, that's not the best surfer on the planet. That's not Surfer in the universe. Come on.
Well, that's what I love about Silver Surfer. He's just like a miserable bastard. He's just the most depressing character.
There's one panel I can think of where he was smiling, and it really does stand out because you're right. He's just like a real gloomy Gus. But it's when he meets Dr. Doom, and he's at Dr. Doom's castle in Latveria, and then Dr. Doom shows him a photograph of the cosmos, and all of a sudden he gets this huge smile, like this massive grin, and then that's when Dr. Doom kind of sticks the diodes or whatever, like sticks them in the side of his head and like sucks all his energy out. So like the one time Silver Surfer had a happy moment, it was the end for him.
Yeah, that's sad. What a sad existence.
Doc, Tom, what brought you into comics? What was it because I know both of you guys have passions for it. Tom, you're an Eisner-nominated cartoonist. What brought you into this medium?
I mean, as a fan, it was just, when you're a kid, it's like, I loved superheroes, from TV, Super Friends and the Batman TV show from the 60s and Superman from the 50s. And I wanted to find out more about superheroes. I wanted to find out about other superheroes that I hadn't heard about. And comics was the only place to go. If you wanted to get beyond Wonder Woman, Batman, Superman, and maybe Spider-Man and the Hulk, you had to start reading comics. So that's what it was. That was my gateway. And so everything else sort of grew out of that. It was once I sort of tapped into that, oh yeah, there's this huge mythology and comics are the source of it, kind of like the best and more or less the only source for it, which, would be very different for a kid today. If you're a kid today, there's a lot of different avenues you can go down if you're into superheroes, not necessarily the comics.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's kind of came out of, as a kid, yeah, you're exposed to, Spider-Man, exposed to the Hulk, Batman, Superman, all these major, tent poles for comic books. But if you had to explore these things more, you found that there were comic books when you'd go to the bookstore or the drugstore and you'd see those racks that had books there, and you could grab them and say, oh, well, this is, the Hulk from those almost Johnny Quest, shows that were on back in the day, or Captain America. And, then you get the books. And I remember my parents buying me some books like Kazar back in the day and things like that. So these are characters that you didn't see on television or hear about. And you're like, who's this guy? And then you look in and they'd have this whole like mosaic of characters. You could order comics from the comic book and you'd have this whole, group of characters standing there. You'd see characters go, well, who's that right there? And who's this character? I remember in the back of a DC comic, they had all these characters in Martian Manhunters there that I'm going, what's this big green dude? I got to figure out who this guy is. And so it made you have to go to find these comics that had these characters in them. And then you figured out, well, this guy's a strong Superman, but he's really, powerful too. But fire gets him? They don't want to give him your fire. That's not fair. I mean, it's just like all these little tiny things that you would look at and realize that there was more, and you had to go explore more and more. So it was really the idea of exploration of the stories behind these and the other characters that you didn't see commonplace. It was kind of like this little secret that you kind of had that other kids didn't know at first. You're like, oh, there's more characters out there. You think Superman's the best, but there's other guys that could do this stuff too. And that was kind of your cool little secret. So that got me into comics. That got me into comics.
What were your favorites growing up, Tom and Daryl and Chuck?
I mean, I loved Batman and stuff like that. The Batman TV show, Adam West and everything. And then it was like 88, 89. Once I was like more like aware of things because I was like 5 or 6 around then. But that X-Men is definitely what drew me in. It was Cyclops' hair that I thought was really cool. So it made me want to pick up the comic book and then read it. And it was all this like heavy shit about him having to send his kid into the future and everything. And like that's just what pulled me in. Apparently, 6-year-old Charles really liked the father-son dynamic kind of thing, and that's what made me gravitate towards that. And then yeah, pretty much reading all that stuff. It was, it's hard like growing up in the kind of like in a Republican conservative town where like you're the only brown kid. It's you can't make friends that easily. It's just, and then comic books were there for me. I was just reading and I could see, oh, they have problems too. And it's just one of those ways that it helped me get over things kind of, or like help me grow.
I remember how we became friends. We were playing Hero Clicks and I was telling you how badass Guy Gardner is and saying that he was the Wolverine of the Green Lantern Corps.
You wouldn't let go of Guy Gardner for, I would say, about 2 years after we met.
I just watched the Batman Brave and the Bold yesterday with Guy Gardner in it. It was pretty badass. So I still love Guy Gardner to this day. Tom, what was the first book that you got into?
Yeah, I mean, it would have been, I mean, when I was really little, it was like the Star Wars comics, because like I just had like Star Wars fever, and again, you could get more Star Wars story, there, you didn't have to like wait till the summer or whatever for Return of the Jedi or something. So it's like the Star Wars comics. I check out Spider-Man, Superman, but like X-Men really like blew my mind. And it was like the classic X-Men. It was the reprints where they like reprint an old John Byrne, Chris Claremont story, and then they'd have like a little short story in the back that was new. That blew my mind. And I was really into Iron Man. I just liked his concept, and the toys were coming out around that time too. So that kind of fed into it too. You'd see a cool toy of like Captain America or Iron Man and be like, okay, I want to learn more about this guy. And so Iron Man and X-Men were the ones that like I asked my mom to send away for a subscription to me for. So I subscribed to both of those. And the Iron Man was interesting, but like the X-Men, like you were saying, it like really like draws you in. It's got this great ensemble. Everybody looked super cool. And they happened to be reprinting, at the time I was reading it, they were reprinting just that classic stuff that they keep going back to with like the Hellfire Club and just the early appearances of Wolverine on the team and stuff, where they're still trying to figure out who this guy is. So I mean, that kind of stuff would hook anybody, and they keep reintroducing that to generation after generation. Like that's the stuff that's like still in print.
Yeah, for me, I would say that the first comic that I ever bought with my own money was Daredevil. I think I have it around here somewhere, actually. Probably behind.
Is it the Frank Miller Daredevil?
It is in that time. The one where Daredevil loses his control of his radar sense and he has to go back to stick, and everything is like re-heightened. And it was like, that was like I love that cover. But a lot of the comics that I had in the beginning, like were those almost those small little omnibus comics that were like little books that you get, like the Hulk. And there was a Hulk book that just had the first issues of the Hulk, and when he was gray and he'd have to go lock himself up at night because his powers would come out at night, and it was like, that was what I would read all the time. We'd go on trips and I'd have that book open and reading it. I really love the Hulk. I do. And it's because he's so misunderstood as a character, in the sense that his whole thing is like, I don't really want you to bother me, but everybody, because of his appearance, they bother him, and they like, you're a monster, you're this. And then the monsters really were around him all the time with his family, and turning him into this whole thing of almost like father like son issue, with him being this full of rage character, and the Hulk really being this protector at the same time as this monster is this protector. And I really love like the Hulk. But then as I grew into getting comics more, X-Men, of course, X-Men for everybody. I think X-Men is one of those things everybody feels like an outcast. So being a punk rock kid, being an African-American kid, X-Men really hits you deep in your soul, because there are these misfit characters out there supposedly who you look at them and go, but they're not different. They have powers just like Spider-Man. They have powers just like, you know, people who have a super soldier serum. It's like, but they just were born with them and they're the outcasts. It's like they're being prosecuted for this stuff, persecuted for this. It's crazy. And the whole dynamic of Xavier and Magneto and all that with Malcolm X, and it just great stories. But then I really got deep into Moon Knight, and Moon Knight was like the guy. I was like, oh my god, this is, and he's not, Marvel's Batman in no way. It's like there's this, it's just his the whole character, like the Werewolf by Night stories with Moon Knight, so good. And I remember reading those over and over again, going, this is a character that I like really loved, because of the idea of him being three guys and his mental illness, trying to figure out who's what and what he's doing, and each of these aspects of him keep him kind of going. But then he's really Spectre, but he's all these guys at the same time. It's just really cool. So those are the kind of the things that got me into comics. But then I just, as Charles will tell you, I just started buying everything, and it became a problem because I like it all.
You mentioned something about Moon Knight not being Batman. No, Moon Knight isn't, but Daredevil is. And once again, in brilliant tradition, in Marvel tradition, they go, okay, how do we make this character more human? He's not a billionaire vigilante. Well, he has to have a job. Okay, well, what else does he have? Well, he's blind. Okay, so you make it even harder for this Batman to survive. You put him in a real situation, and obviously he has to have that the ability to sense people, or just be completely crazy.
It's almost as though they thought, okay, if we're going to make a Marvel Batman, how can we improve on it? And the idea of making him blind like a bat and giving him echolocation, that's an improvement on the Batman concept. Like Daredevil is more entitled to be a Batman than Batman is. And you can kind of see in the Dark Knight movie, they do that. They give Batman this like echolocation, this Daredevil style. It's technological rather than biological, but they give him this radar sense. So it's kind of like, I think the two companies should sort of come together and maybe like merge their characters, or like swap like some things or something.
Well, gentlemen, let's get down to what you guys got going on product wise. Daryl, we'll start with you. The Essential, the new album coming out, first record since Heavyweights in 1995. Toby Jag is putting it out on Red Scare Records. If I remember correctly, you recorded at $1 Million Yen Studio for this record?
No, actually, we recorded at Echo Mill in Chicago. So Jeff Dean did the engineering on it, and he used to be at $1 Million Yen. But so it was a long time in the making. We haven't released an LP since Heavyweight, which was in '95 on Doctor Strange. Last release we had though was back about 15 years ago. We released a single on Underground Communique Records in Chicago that Justin was running, and those songs on that 7-inch were going to be a part of our LP that we were going to have come out 15 years ago. And a lot of things got in the way of us getting together to put together our LP. We had, band members had left, our original bass player left. We had a big discussion on whether or not we wanted to still be a band for a period of time. But we, toughed it out. And finally, I think we got the right group together with the addition of Pete Mittler, our bass player. It made us really gel. Yeah, it made us gel. And we kind of became the band that we were always supposed to evolve into. It was kind of our final form on Dragon Ball Z, I guess. We are now, Final Frieza or whatever we're supposed to be, or Super Saiyan, whatever they get to. It probably is an infinite number. But we finally became that, final form. And we were able to then start prolifically putting together some stuff and making sure that things that we wrote were really quality and not just putting out quantity things. So Essential is really been born out of kind of forging ourselves through the fire and going through obstacles that helped us to kind of gel to become what we are. It really is a love letter to people out there doing essential work. but kind of also an understanding that we're all essential to each other. Even the album cover has this wheel, and spokes in the wheel are arms holding the wheel together, just a general gist of all of us as humanity. And it is a labor of total love, and it's something that I think is the best things we put out in our career. I know Heavyweight's a great record, and Stick Your Neck Out's a classic, all those things, and they are great. But this really is an amazing record. I never want to brag about stuff like that, but I really am happy with this. All of us are, and we are excited for people to hear it.
You see the best of everything, at least you tell yourself. You turn a blind eye to suffering, you'll never get my help. I highly doubt that we could change. It must be ingrained in our DNA. Like we can try to see with different eyes, 'cause we harbor deep inside. When misery loves company, at least you tell yourself. Revel in ruin that you could bring. You've lost your mental health. I highly doubt that we could change. It must be ingrained in our DNA. Like we can try to see with different eyes, 'cause we harbor deep inside. How does it feel to be alone? 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 I highly doubt that we could change. It must be ingrained in our DNA. Like we can try to see with different eyes, 'cause we harbor deep inside. I highly doubt that we can change. It must be ingrained in our DNA. Like we can try to see with different eyes, 'cause we harbor deep inside.
And Tom, I can't tell you enough how much I appreciate you. I love you as well. I've been a big fan of you since G.I. Joe versus Transformers. I love the artwork. I like that you are a Kirby guy. One of the most fantastic things I've heard you say is that you don't give a fuck out if you get a message from my stories. I'm just here to produce good stories. And I like that honesty, that candidness. I love the artwork. I gotta ask, and I know it was sort of addressed on Comic Cartoonist Kayfabe, the one of the channels you contribute to, that Jim Rugg asked you why Stan, because when you read the Jack Kirby book, you don't really put Stan in a decent light. I don't think you're criticizing Stan, because I think you as a historian tried to make that graphic novel on 10-Speed Press fairly accurate to the situation of what Jack was dealing with Stan. But why did 10-Speed Press just say, hey, this Jack Kirby book is so cool, we need you to make Stan? Or was this always something that you wanted to do after the Jack Kirby autobiography graphic novel?
Well, I mean, after I did the Jack Kirby book, I didn't want to do anything, comic book creator. I had sort of gotten it out of my system. Working on a book, it just sucks every ounce of enthusiasm out of you to get to the end. So I needed to recharge. So they asked, would you like to do a Stan Lee book to follow this up? Because it is a natural follow-up. And I was like, no way, hell no. But, enough time had passed, and, I'd sort of gotten accustomed to the idea little by little, and it's sort just in the back of my mind, it kept building and building. I kind of figured out like a way to do it, and a way that would be really interesting. And also, I don't have, I didn't have anything against Stan Lee or anything like that. But he's a complicated person. It's a complicated story. There's a lot there. I have so much empathy for him, and just the ways that he sort of the questions and the sort of suffering and the sort of oddness of the things that were going on, like towards the end of his life, made his story like extra fascinating and like much more relevant. Like if he had sort of, gone quietly into the night, like if his life had sort of been what we all sort of thought his life was, just this sort of, hey, everything's great and I love it, I wouldn't have had very much interest in doing his story. But the sort of very, very odd and tragic turn that his life took all of a sudden made it like really like a story that I wanted to tell. And just like in a similar way with Kirby, it's just when you look at the wide story from start to finish, each of these men's lives, it's just got such an interesting shape to it, and really tell two completely different stories. So that it was that sort of thing. It was like the germ of something that just kept growing and growing and growing.
On top of that, Tom, I want to know if there's any like cool moments or things that you found out about Stan that you wish you could have put into the book but you didn't.
Yeah, I mean, just to answer that one quickly, I saw somebody post on Twitter like the other day about being at a Roy Thomas panel where like Roy Thomas was telling this story about like a bomb threat at the building, and like Stan he said that Stan moved as fast as a person could move without actually running, without breaking into a run. And so that's a nice little detail. Maybe that, like hearing that, I'm like, oh, I hadn't heard that one. That might have been a nice little segue or a fun little segment to put, anything physical, like, some physical comedy would be nice. So that's the first one that comes to mind.
Do you think Stan needed Jack and Jack needed Stan? Do you feel like that was necessary?
It's such an interesting question. It's something you can debate forever.
Yes.
Kirby without Stan without Kirby. I mean, I think that and Jack Kirby had Joe Simon prior to that. We have Jack Kirby alone, then we have Jack Kirby with Joe Simon, then we have Jack Kirby alone again, then we have Jack Kirby with Stan Lee, then we have Jack Kirby alone. So there's a lot of different things you can compare and contrast. I did reach a point where I realized like I need a little more Stan. It's just me. So I need to work on the Stan side of myself. Like I kind of, have the Kirby side and I have the Stan side. I need to work on it. Like you do need that hype man, like
I
talking
didn't bring
about.
my costume tonight. I'm sorry.
Ultimately, I think, Kirby would have done just fine as Kirby. Stan would have done just fine as Stan. If you look at them, they have their moments where they're working together. They have their moments where they're working apart. And each one of those guys are tremendously prolific. It's a huge body of work, and together and separate. And there's just so much there. I mean, that was the big thing working on this Stan Lee book. I was very familiar with all of Jack Kirby's little bits and pieces, his little odds and ends, little weird stories we don't know about, the comics and things. But like the Stan Lee, I wasn't as familiar, so I kind of like learned a lot of that stuff in the process of making this. And he had a whole career. And before they sort of really crossed paths in the late 50s and early 60s and like really created that magic, that Marvel magic, Stan seemed like he was heading towards something. It wasn't necessarily going to be what we saw, but he seemed like he was heading, like there was a critical mass building. And the same with Kirby. Kirby was heading towards something, and probably something a little closer to what, like with Challengers of the Unknown. It's like it was getting so close to what they eventually did together. But then the stuff they did together, it was just like, it was such magic. It was like these two guys about to like, looking for some kind, they'd both been in the business almost the same amount of time. Kirby had like a couple years on Stan, but they'd both been in it a long time and like were entering middle age, or kind of like, it's leave or figure something out. And so they were both kind of at that same point, and a lot of people of their generation too. And they just sort of, collided and created a supernova and created this really great body of work. That who knows if they would have arrived, that they might not have arrived there specifically, separately. Like they kind of had to get there together. But if that hadn't happened, Stan might have left comics, Kirby might have left comics. Comics, as we know them, superhero comics might have gone away, who knows? But I think they would have found some interesting place for themselves, because Kirby, he does have a huge body of work. He's got TV pitches and things like, I think things would have worked out. It just wouldn't have been this thing that we know. But I don't I think they benefited from working together, but they would have figured something out.
Yeah, I would have to agree with you. I know just watching your channel, you're a big fan of the New Gods, which is exclusively Kirby.
Yeah.
And if I remember correctly, that's some of your favorite Kirby storytelling is. I mean, that's why you have New Gods Sunday School every Sunday on the Total Recall show on YouTube. Daryl, my question is,
Sure.
who is Jack and who is Stan? Are you the Stan? Are you the Stan and Ken is the Jack when it comes to the Bollweevils?
I'm probably Stan, probably. And
Well,
I think
yeah, I
Ken
mean-
is- that has to be. I mean, Ken does write, the hooks and things that actually get us going, but I'm the front man who pulls all the, crazy stuff on stage and says all the things, writes these lyrics that kind of have this whole thing that put it all together as well. So, yeah, I'd have to say that's how that would work out. I don't know if he puts the Kirby crackle in what he's playing, in his guitar, but yeah, I would say that probably I'm Stan and he's Kirby.
You saved somebody at Rebel Fest in England. Can you tell us a little about that?
I mean, I try not to have my worlds cross into each other. I don't try to bring, I mean, I'm always a physician and there's always, me looking out for people's well-being and our health, but I try not to cross over at those times. But, you see somebody's in need and you have to then intervene. That's what you do. That's what my, core is. And we were actually walking to one of the other stages, the band and I were walking to one of the stages, and there was this individual who was passed out, in the forum area where we're at, and they had all their, emergency technicians were responding, and I walk over to the individual, and they were a little altered, but they were breathing, and I was asking them questions regarding what had happened, and the guys look up at me, and I'm like, I'm an American physician here at the Rebellion Fest, playing in the band the Bollweevils. I'm here helping you if I can help in any way. And the person, they checked their glucose was okay, and it's like I was asking what they might have ingested because they're at a festival and there's all kinds of crazy things that might be happening at that place. So likely there was some ingestion that had occurred that may have led to the individual being more altered than they should have been, and they required medical assistance. So I just did my medical supportive care that I could do. I mean, it's hard to do medical care in the field. Yes, I've seen all the episodes of MASH, and yes, could I, take a sharp object and put it into your, cricothyroid membrane and, help support your breathing if I had to? Yes, that is a possibility. It would be very unsterile, very uncool, Jack the Ripper-esque, but it could be done. But honestly, it's very limiting. I have this environment that I work in that makes it easy when I have my, the hospital and the hospital bed and all the tools that I at my disposal to make things happen. But can I do some things? Could I do some wilderness medicine on you? Of course. Could I fashion a splint out of something? Sure. So I've done that at other shows too. At the Circle Jerk show recently, a guy had fallen down and I actually intervened on that guy. He almost fell over the banister. I'm like, and I'm looking, and my buddy Lou's with me, and he looks at me, he's like, don't get up. I'm like, I have to. He says, you don't got to do this. You're not working right now. I'm like, I have to get up. So went over, helped him out, and made sure he was okay. And the goofiest thing about it, which is really funny, I hope he's watching, it's like I'm helping him. I'm waiting for EMS to arrive. He's got this huge gash in his head. I'm holding direct pressure to stop the bleeding. He's a little drunk. He's a little altered. I'm like, yeah, my dogs get in the way. And it's like,
That's
hey,
fine.
you can't, you need to go to the hospital. And his wife is mad because it's like the 8th time he's fallen or something. And his friends are there and they're like, hey, we know who you are. I'm like, okay. He says, can we take a picture with you? I'm like, your friend is kind of jacked up here. Like, can we not do this? He's like, no, can we take a picture? I'm like, sure. So we take a picture and then the EMS comes and takes him away. And I'm like, that's kind of an odd thing. It's like your friend's jacked up. You want to take a picture with the, D-list celebrity over here, who's happens to be hanging out at the Circle Jerk show. But no, it's just one of those things. You see people in need, you got to help. And that's what I think, not just for my profession, it's just something that we have to do as human beings for each other. So I would hope that most people, if they saw somebody in distress, that they would actually go and assist. And I'm happy to do it. It's a part of what my, inner core says. My DNA says I have to do it.
Do you attribute some of that altruism to comic books, to reading comic books?
I think there's, you could get caught up in the idea that there's this whole thing of heroic, it's gone through all of literature, right? That people have this journey. Heroes have to go through these things. You suffer for your craft. You do all this, but in the end, you come out and here's the victory because you've done what's right and moral and those other things. So I hope that people who do read like superhero stories or see things do get inspired to do what's right and do good. I would say this. I used to be totally a Batman guy. Batman. And then I started thinking about Batman's, war on crime and what he does. I'm like thinking, God, Batman is just a disturbed little kid who's just so pissed off that his parents died. He's using his fortune for the worst things. He's just beating the crap out of poor people. Who, if the Wayne Foundation put some money into things, did some healthcare stuff, made jobs and built some stuff, there would be a better utopia in Gotham would become Metropolis. But so I started really liking Superman more, because Superman is a guy that has all the power. He could, basically decimate us, but he chooses not to because he knows I was taught that this is the way we're supposed to be. It's like I'm the hero because I choose to be, and he doesn't have to be. He doesn't have to be, and that's the thing. All of us as human beings get this choice. My dog is choosing to.
That's your crypto. That's your crypto.
Pretty much, Elliot, you goof. So it is this choice that you make. And I think all of us have the power to make decisions and make these choices. And especially when you have power, that you can choose to wield it in a way that's really draconian and harmful, or to realize that you can do greater good with it all. So I still like Batman because it's a great character study and, looking at things and questioning whether or not, is the Joker the bad guy or not. But then people who have a Joker avatar on things are usually bad guys. That's a problem if you're looking at somebody online. But it is the thing of like, hey, choose to do good because we can. When you have the power to do something and make some change, try and do that.
Jim Rugg mentioned it in a cartoonist kayfabe. He referred to Batman as a fascist. And I can kind of see it.
Well, I mean, all of these different characters represent different aspects of the human condition. So, I mean, it makes sense that if we really dive deep on this stuff, we've, again, spent tons of money collecting these comics, reading. So we've spent basically a lifetime contemplating all these different aspects of the human experience. So it makes sense that as we go on our journey of life, there's going to be certain characters who really speak to us and others that don't. And then they almost sort of switch places, where the one you didn't like before has now become your favorite, or, so I completely relate to that. And then there's also there's the characters who are interesting from a story sense. And then there's the characters that are just fun to look at and fun to draw.
Oh my God.
And Batman's just so much more fun to look at than Superman,
Right.
Stuff like that. And working on the Fantastic Four, it was a lot of that kind of stuff too, because the Fantastic Four, it's like, man, if only they had some cool visors, like the X-Men, or something. It's a jumpsuit, the number 4, and then just your head, But as I delved into it, I like that from a conceptual angle. That, again, you talk about superheroes as fascist icons or whatever. It's like the Fantastic Four were like these enlightened heroes. They didn't wear masks. They didn't intimidate. They just, hey, we're just here, and we're a nonprofit. They talk about that from the earliest issues. They're a nonprofit organization that's dedicated to the betterment of society. They're not looking to beat anybody up. Very rarely did they chase a bank robber. It's like, so that even the, the Thing is a ton of fun to draw. But Reed and Sue, it's like, they're not as much fun to draw, but I love the philosophy of it.
I love the Fantastic Four, and I think they're a great gateway into the galactic universe of Marvel. And like you said, they never like, it's never like, hey, Midtown, there's a robbery. Let's go, Fantastic Four, assemble. You know,
I will strike fear into them with the number 4. When they see the number 4, they will cower.
I think it's so cool too. I mean, with Reed as being like this intellect that is beyond anything, and at the same time, sometimes his intellect makes him seem like he's so not connected to anything, but he's such a family guy, right? And at the same time, as you mentioned, his guilt, that he can do almost magical, insane things, think it up, but he can't cure his friend. And that's the one thing he can't change Ben, except for that short period of time where Ben has his moments where he's, in human form. But I didn't really like the Fantastic Four for a while. I started reading them, Hickman started writing them. And so I always thought, they're kind of boring. They're kind of this. But then as you start to read them and get into the nuance of their dynamic of the family, and then even the expanded family of Reed's family, it's like, wow, what a group of characters here. And they don't have to have masks. You're looking at them and going, here's who we are. And I might be the smartest guy in the world, but I'm flawed and sometimes don't see it. I need my wife to point this out to me, or my best friend who I can't fix, or my, brother-in-law who's like the hothead guy, but he still actually has insight into things that I can't even see. And they work together as dynamic. And then the kids getting involved. It's such a cool thing.
Hickman's a phenomenal writer. Charles, you got some questions? I know you do. We've been talking.
I've been itching here, but
go ahead.
I'll say that I've never really cared too much for Fantastic Four until Grand Design. That's like the first time I've ever really picked up an FF book, and I loved it, like the artwork and everything. What I want to know is that, like, how did you choose those story moments to like highlight in there, to like, because I mean you had what, like 30, 40 years and more to choose from. Like, what did you feel was most important? Like, how did you choose it, Tom?
Well, yeah, I mean, like what you were saying, that was, I saw that as a challenge, that like the Fantastic Four has been struggling for a really long time, like for decades, to really take a foothold, and especially like just in the public imagination. Like in the 90s, we had that really cool X-Men cartoon that really got like a couple generations like really deep into X-Men. And Fantastic Four, we didn't really have, like, the Fantastic Four cartoon around the same time just didn't have the impact. Like it just didn't, it just didn't connect in the same way. So it's like, I want to make people care about the Fantastic Four, and it's a challenge. Like, how do I do it? And so, and like, as far as which stories to choose, it's like, I walk into it and I'm like, there's already like a sense of the story of the Fantastic Four that I just already have in me just from everything I've read. So I use that as like the starting point. So it's like, what kind of stuff's important to me with the Fantastic Four? And then what kind of play that up against, okay, what kind of stuff is important with just like the general public with the Fantastic Four? So I got those two things. And then it's like, what can I learn about the Fantastic Four in this certain amount of time? And so I kind of put those things together, but leaning heavily just on my own personal experience of the Fantastic Four. So like, what really spoke to me? So it'd be a lot of the early Kirby stuff, some of the John Byrne era stuff, some of the things that I wished I would have seen in the Fantastic Four but didn't see, and then like some of my Kirby fandom, all the little like what his idea of Silver Surfer was versus the published version of the Silver Surfer. And then again, like what's important to me. And I came into this stuff during like the Secret Wars era, with like the toys, comics, and the games. So it's like, I don't know how important Secret Wars is to the Fantastic Four story as written, but from my perspective, it's like vitally important. So I had to, pull those kind of things into it. And then just larger things like Days of Future Past. And like when Ed did his X-Men, like Days of Future Past was like real important in there too. And like Days of Future Past was just so important to me as this, like, even though it's ostensibly an X-Men story, it's like we find out how all the Fantastic Four die, and it just really resonated. It felt, even though there's been other Marvel futures and other different, that one just kind of stuck. So it's like, so it's this alchemy of like all that stuff. Like what does the Fantastic Four mean to me? And then as I'm diving back into it and researching it, like what story is it telling me? And so that's where a lot of the things came into it, and the stuff with like Reed and Sue and Namor. It just felt like that body of work was, this is the story it's telling me, even if it's not necessarily, the story as we sort of accept it.
Is there like any like key story that you like keep going back to that you feel like embodies the Fantastic Four as a whole more so than anything else?
Yeah, I mean, there's two that I just like really loved, and it's I mean, the thing is with the Fantastic Four, it's like greatest hits, and everybody sort of names the same ones, but it's true. Like the Coming of Galactus is just great. I love it. It's just like this great sci-fi story, this great superhero story. But then like another one that is maybe like even more perfect is the one I was talking about with when Dr. Doom steals the Silver Surfer's powers. To me, that's almost like Jack Kirby and Stan Lee's last great moment. That's where both of them were like full firing on all cylinders, full power. And it's like what I think of with Marvel.
Well, that kind of leads into what G.I. Joe or Transformers versus G.I. Joe, which I love. Like both me and Ben fucking love it. But I want to know, what I wanted to know though is because it's very interesting. Issue 10, like Duke and Falcon's relationship. Like no one likes Falcon. Like I love Falcon ever since I was a kid. Like how did you land on like dedicating a whole issue to it?
I mean, I had a long amount of time to prepare for that comic because it was kind of like I got the gig and then it was like 6 months or something before issue 1 came out. Or we talked about the gig and I didn't have the gig yet, but I started working on it. So I had so much time and I was going deep with every one of those characters, and kind of similar to Fantastic Four. I'm like, what do these characters mean to me? And then I'm diving into the research, reading the stuff, and then I'm also like trying to imagine like, because like the Transformers have been here for 1 million years. So it's like, what was Scarlet's family up to 1 million years ago? So I'm going back to like Ireland and the Celts and all this kind of stuff, and did that for all of them. And then it's like, okay, Duke always kind of, it's like, okay, we got Duke and his name's Conrad Hauser. And then we have Falcon, who I forget, like Falcone or something.
Vincent. Yeah.
Yeah, they have 2 different last names. They're brothers. They have 2 different last names. What's the story there? What's going, and sort of tracing it back, and it just seemed to me this idea of these 2 brothers, step brothers, maybe half brothers, something, but like, how do they fit together, and just going deep into and just exploring that and just this and figuring out like who's their grandfather, who's their great grandfather, all this kind of stuff. And it all just, so by the time I got to issue 10, all this stuff had already been percolated. I kind of created this whole universe for myself, and it was like I wanted to tell that story of like these 2 brothers who'd been at odds their whole life, and how they got there. And again, it's just funny how this, because it just starts with like a little tiny seed, and then it just starts with being a kid and being like, oh, that's Duke's brother. They don't look alike. They don't have the same last name, and then you let that simmer, you let that percolate in your subconscious, and then you open the oven door, and all of a sudden, you got this whole crazy thing.
What blows my mind, you talk about it in the Total Recall show on the YouTube channel. A lot of people were telling you not to do the book, and you're like, no, I have to do this book. You don't understand. Usually in Daryl, Charles, and I all know, like toy books, Larry Hama talks about it. That's the throwaway book. So it's interesting that people were like, oh, you really don't want to do a G.I. Joe versus Transformers book, and you're like, no, I have to do this. You don't understand. And did you initially, when they offered you the gig, IDW offered you the gig, was it like this? Did you know that this would be kind of something that would bring you to a larger stratosphere as far as comic books go?
Well, I mean,
because it really is the breakthrough book for you.
Yeah, it was the breakthrough for me. And I like when John Barber like offered it to me, or just floated the idea. It wasn't even an offer yet. It was just like, hey, what do you think of this? It felt like a gift. It felt like a gift from heaven or something. Like, because it was like, that's so perfect. Like, that's so perfect for me. Like that is an assignment that fits my personality, fits my approach, fits my style. You're giving me like I can make something amazing out of this. I had a very clear vision of what it was going to be, and I didn't care about anything else. I didn't care about the fact that it's, like you said, it's a toy thing, or that it's work for hire with no residuals, and like you're just getting paid per page and that's it. I didn't care about any of that. I knew, and just thinking of Kirby's story, Jack Kirby and the lives of all these guys, it's like, if you can create something amazing, everything else is going to figure itself out. So let me just make this amazing thing, and then not worry about like, oh, what happens if I'm at the movie theater and I see the Transformers versus G.I. Joe movie with all my ideas in it and my name's not even in the credits. Like, I can live with that. I need to make this amazing thing. And so I went in, and having everybody tell me not to do it actually kind of helps. Like that was kind of perfect, because you want to kind of be scrappy and have something to prove. And if, like it I mean, I don't know, maybe it would have been nice if everybody would have said, hey, that's great, we got your back. But yeah, everybody telling me not to do it was definitely had an effect that benefited the work.
And just last question here for me, man. When are you and Ed going to cover more Nintendo Power? My son loved you guys doing that first issue, and shit, I loved it too. We sometimes play it when we go to sleep and just chill. Like, when are you going to do another one?
That's a great idea. I kind of forgot it. I mean, because whenever Jim is out of town, if me and Ed are able to like meet up and do some episodes, it's like, okay, now it's our chance to do the kind of stuff Jim has like no interest in whatsoever. Like, I don't think Jim owned a Nintendo or an Atari or anything when he was a kid. So it's like, what? And so that was one. It was like, oh yeah, Jim would never want to talk about this. Let's do Nintendo Power. But no, I'm glad you brought that up, because I had forgotten about that. And I got some pile of issues laying around here.
Awesome. I hope to see some more. Even a Total Recall show. We need
Sure,
some more.
Yeah, because that then I don't have to like sort of line up everybody's schedule. I can just sort of come in here and just throw them down, flip through them.
Heck yeah. Now, Daryl, your top three when it comes to the books.
Books, as in writers, or the books themselves?
Either with the comic book creators. Your top three.
That's hard. I mean, wow. I guess Claremont. Ditko. See, you're going old school too. Going old school stuff. It's like I like even looking at modern day writers who I think are. I mean, like Frank Miller. I like Mark Miller. I like Hickman. I think Hickman is amazing. So I love Kirkman's stuff. I love Rick Remender's stuff. I love all of Rick Remender's stuff. So I mean, it's like that's where I'm like, if I'm looking at what got me into comics, is going back to like Claremont and Ditko and Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. I mean, we could talk those things, but then you talk about modern day, and it's like Pack, like I could go all over the place. And it's funny thing is, it's like I remember Charles and I had a conversation about this once, because Charles was like, I follow like the characters, but then they change, of course, with each iteration of who's writing them at the time, and they have kind of a core that's there, and they kind of change a little bit. And then Charles is like, you should be following the writers, following those that are writing, because then you're going to find their style kind of crosses into these other characters that you might have not wanted to read before, and then you might find something interesting about them. Yeah, I really can't give you a top three. It's like I have this menagerie of writers that I find to be really interesting. I don't know. I can't pick it. I'm fickle. I like everything. Can't stop, won't stop. Can't stop, started from the bottom. Now we're here buying comics. I think that's important. And I think that's important. I think what happens a lot of times in geek culture, we get caught up on so much like factionizing crap that doesn't mean anything. It's like, what happened to fun? Do you just enjoy it? And that's just do that, because we get caught up on, well, you can't do that because that's not canon. Who cares? They're fictional characters that have magical swords and they fly through this. Who cares? It's not real.
You know,
I can't
you and
believe
I have a-
I can't believe that Leia can fly in space because she's got the Force. It's like, who cares?
You don't understand
It's
how
the
heavy that
Force.
was for me. No, it's not. They never
Who
fly.
cares? The Force does all kinds of things if you have power to do it. It's like having a Green Lantern ring. It's willpower. So just have fun. And that's the thing I think people lose all the time is like, just have fun.
You know, that's funny you say it's not real. A year ago, I'm walking in the dark and I say out loud, "Whoa, I feel like Daredevil." And my wife yells, "You don't feel like Daredevil because Daredevil's not real." And I
Right.
started laughing. And you're right, it is very fictionalized. And it is what you and I talked about what happened to fun. And I think
Yeah.
fun's coming back. I think fun's coming back with the new Bollweevils album, The Essentials, on Red Scare Records. It's going to be out May 5th.
That's a great segment. Look at you. You know how to
Well,
pull it around.
you know, I would, you would not, you would be shocked to know I actually work in television for a living.
Right, there you go.
So-
You bring it back.
Well, thank you. So, real quick, May 27th,
Yes.
you're going to get me on the guest list, right? Because all my friends are playing. Rad Payoff, Jason, who I grew up with, and the Dopamines from Ohio. I know them all. You don't have to list me. I'll buy the ticket. I'm
good. I
more than
appreciate
happy to.
I appreciate that, supporting artists that are struggling as they are, like we're struggling artists. We're struggling. The world is struggling really, really bad.
Yeah.
So you got to help us out.
No, I will. You know, I've always firmly believed buy what you love. That's why I bought
Yes.
Tom's books. That's why I'm going to buy. What is it, Tom? I Am Stan.
I Am Stan, a graphic biography of the legendary Stan Lee.
I can't wait to read it. It might be very difficult. It might be a hard pill for me to swallow because there's a lot of things in the biography, the Jack Kirby book, that made me not like Stan so much. Like I get, we talked about you talked about the Angry Samoans and how in modern time it's a little icky, and we have to apply that same sort of logic to the business of comic books in that period of time. No one was getting their art. Neil Adams was the one that had to push for artists to get respect, for artists to get rights. I mean, that was, and ultimately what was interesting is, of course, Adams did not come from comic books. He came from the advertising business, if I remember so, Tom. Correct me if I'm wrong. You are the comic book historian on record here today.
Yeah.
So I have to. So when I read the stuff that happened between Jack and Stan, I also have to apply that was normal business practices at that period of time in the industry. So maybe I will have to apply that because I am definitely going to get the book. It's off 10 Speed Press. So before I let you gentlemen go, plug your socials. Let us know where we can find you, both of you. We'll start with we'll go alphabetical order. Doctor, tell us, give us the socials.
So you can find us on Instagram at the Bollweevils Chicago. You can find us on Facebook. There's 2 accounts, so there's 2 different fighting factions of the Bollweevils. There's the Bollweevils, which is our initial page, the Alpha 1 page, and the Alpha 2 page. So it's like the X-Men Blue and gold teams that they had back in the day. Then we have the Bollweevils Chicago on Facebook. We have us on Twitter as well. Our social guys are on Twitter. I swear they logged in just the other day to do something. I have no idea if they're still doing that. You can find our record for pre-order on Red Scare's website. You can find our music on all streaming services. Go to Bandcamp as well. New record comes out May 5th, which we're really excited for. We got shows coming up as well too. So hope to see you guys out there. You can buy our merch if you want to get a Bollweevils t-shirt. Go to anxiousandangry.com. Working with Ryan, so he's got our shirts out there. So we got a lot of stuff out. So just glad to be still doing this after all these years and keep on doing as much as I can until can't do it anymore.
Fair enough. Tom, give us your socials.
Okay, well, since we were talking about the X-Men, I just want to plug Dave Cockrum real quick because his name doesn't come up enough, in my opinion. Just really important. But yeah, there's going to be a free comic book day version of I Am Stan. You go in your comic book store; it's free. It's a little comic book length thing, and free comic book days May 6th, Saturday, May 6th. So check that out. And you can follow me on Twitter at Tom Scioli, on Instagram at Tom_Scioli. I have the Total Recall Show channel on YouTube where I review old comics, and me and my buddy Matt, we talk about all kinds of stuff, movies, nostalgia stuff from the 80s and 90s, and I have my Patreon. Go to patreon.com, search Tom Scioli, and I post all kinds of stuff, different comics and things as I'm working on, and there's a whole archive of old stuff, PDFs and whatnot you can check out there. And yeah, I Am Stan. The full book is coming out in September. And then also I have another project. It hasn't been like formally announced yet, but it's Jack Kirby's Star Warriors, starring Adam Starr of the Solar Legion. And I've sort of remastered one of Jack Kirby's first comics. And it's the first comic he ever signed his name to. I sort of did this sort of like remaster, recontextualizing it a little bit. So it's like 90% Jack Kirby, 10% me, but that'll be coming out in August.
Fantastic. Gentlemen, I hope we can have you on the show again, because we've got some interesting guests coming up, and I'd love to have you guys as like guest hosts. Like I said, we've got Yui Bowl.
Show them your one-man pie fight impersonation, Mark.
Yeah, I would say. I don't know what I want to say. But...
Charles, let's close it out. So, any final words?
Just thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you for having us on.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Hey.
It's been a pleasure.
You guys have been a pleasure. Ladies and gentlemen, enjoy the Friendly Men and Friendly Fans. Thank you. You guys can find us on Instagram. You guys can find us on Twitter, on YouTube. We've got a lot of fun stuff coming up.